So, a few weeks ago on Pentecost, on the 19th of May, there was a few people from the church who were confirmed by Bishop Aaron. And today we're going to hear from Mark, who was one of those confirmed. He's going to tell us a little bit about his faith journey, how he's finding being a Christian, and what might lie ahead for him as well. So over to Mark.
Good morning. You know, you can have communion if you want to. Those 10 words I'm going to say twice more during my short talk today, because when I heard them, they marked a turning point in my journey to discover my faith and ultimately be confirmed a couple of weeks ago. To start, I better confess that I've never heard God speak directly to me. I've not read the whole of the Bible, and not even most of it. I've not seen or experienced a miracle, and I've not had a personal vision of Jesus. I've never even had a mystical personal experience which I might look back on and say that maybe it was God. Honestly, I'm not what I thought of as a likely candidate for confirmation. I don't come from a particularly religious background, but neither are my family anti-religious. The most I remember speaking to my family about their religious beliefs was my late grandmother. She would talk about how she liked being in church, just not when there was lots of other people or services going on. I remember, though, at her funeral not too long ago, the vicar presiding over the service, who had been a friend of my grandmother's, said how my grandmother had believed in the resurrection to come. It's something I wish I'd spoken to her more about when I had the chance. One thing I have done for a long time is go into churches and other places of worship. I've always felt drawn to them, but not in a way that I can really put into words. Previously, I thought it was just about my appreciation for the history, for the architecture of the building. But looking back now, I realized that there was a sense of peace and reassurance I got when I was in these places. When I studied at Lincoln University, I would go up to the cathedral quite regularly, stare in wonder at the historical features of the building, the stained glass windows, but actually my favorite place was just as you go in on the left, there was a small chapel. And I would go in there, it was very plain and simple, light a candle and just sit quietly. I realize now that that was actually more a time of prayer, just a time of listening. Maybe until recently I was waiting for some grand sign to move me into faith, and maybe I was holding a little bit of hope in these places of worship that there may come along this miraculous sign of God to prove to me that I should commit to Christianity. But instead, the fact is, there were actually times when in church I felt genuinely quite uncomfortable, a bit of an imposter. My mother-in-law and my wife are both Christians, so I did go to church services, probably not as often as I should. I still felt a bit of an imposter, but I wanted to be there when I was there. Then when it came to coming up for communion or the blessing, I really felt conflicted. I kind of wanted to go, but I felt I shouldn't. Thankfully, I was encouraged to go for the blessing by family, and I did this a couple of times, but I often found it easier just to sit it out, watch other people go up. I say it was easier, but actually it really bothered me. It was this feeling of uncertainty, even a slight sense of fear almost, of commitment, possibly. And when watching others have communion, though, I felt a genuine sense, I did feel a genuine sense that I was missing out on something. So all this time I'm feeling something drawing me to faith, to churches, to communion, but I'm sticking with being a religious agnostic. That phrase absolutely suited me down to the ground as a religious studies teacher. And I'd say when asked if I'm religious by the kids, I'm not sure, but I do see the benefit of religion. Because I was an impartial teacher, I had the best safety net, one of non-commitment, makes everything easier. I was able to teach all the arguments for and against God while remaining firmly on the fence. The trouble is, I realize now that sitting on the fence was starting to get quite uncomfortable. Speaking of these feelings of discomfort, there was one day in this church when the call to communion came up, and I decided to be brave and get the blessing. I thought, I shouldn't really take communion unless I've been confirmed. So I came up with my family for a blessing, and when my turn came round about where I'm stood now to get the blessing, Rob asked me, if I'd been baptized, because I came up and said, I better just have the blessing. And Rob says, but have you been baptized? And I say, yes. And he says those 10 words. You know, you can have communion if you want to. I remember it really vividly. You could say it was just a kind vicar. Rob himself says he was just doing his job, inviting me to take part in a traditional Christian activity, but it really meant a lot to me. And I wonder if maybe that was the moment I'd been waiting for. Not the voice of God directly, but certainly his message of welcome via one of his representatives. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but it was also reassuring. It was welcoming. And when I took communion on that day, there was no bright light, there was no angel singing, there was no vision of Jesus in front of me. But it felt weird, good weird, because weird can be good. Recently, Rob introduced me to pistachio spread, and it was weird, but it was really good. And I'm not trying to compare my experience of faith to a nutty based sweet spread, but I want to explain why I'm okay using that word for something new, something positive, and something I wanted to experience more. Shortly after that communion, I was invited to consider confirmation and even attend part of the startup course. So even though I haven't had any of the mystical or miraculous experiences some Christians talk about, I have had the luck and the privilege and the joy of taking part in services in 2 courses about my faith, the Startup course and the Moving On course. It was nice to be able to talk about questions of faith and religion in a welcoming space. You have no idea how reassuring it was for me to hear an ordained, trained minister say in response to some of the deepest and most confusing questions linked to faith, Christianity, and Jesus in the Bible, I don't know, but it's a bit weird. Now, there was a lot more to it. We wrestled with these questions and discussed them with wisdom, with scripture, with intelligence, but it was so encouraging to realize that actually faith is not about having all the answers, all the proof, or all the signs. It's about a bit of courage to explore what you believe. So if there is anyone you know who is considering their faith, or anyone here who, like me, was just here to kind of see what it would be like, or even maybe people watching this online later, if you've got that feeling of curiosity, I would encourage you to talk and speak to others about it. Speak to Christians or those others considering their faith. Wrestle with the question. You may be like me and have no tangible single experience which miraculously led to your belief in Jesus' message, but you may just have that little feeling of, I wonder what it's all about. So after a lot of consideration and a lot of talk and no definite proof of Jesus' divinity, I still realized that I did believe and I wanted to do something about it. And yet, in all honesty, when being confirmed a couple of weeks ago, I still felt like a bit of an imposter. As a religious studies teacher, I've been constantly exploring arguments for and against God, and I wonder if it was the fact that I don't have 100% proof of Jesus' divinity is why I avoided my faith for so long. On that day of confirmation, surrounded by 24 others, I felt a little bit like I was in the wrong place, like I was surrounded by those who believed completely, they had no doubts, they were all certain of God, and as such I began to wonder if I should maybe wait until I'm absolutely certain of God and have no risk of doubt before being confirmed. I have to say I'd be waiting a very long time if that's what I was waiting for. Bishop Aaron was lovely, he was kind, he was welcoming, had a good handshake, but for a while there I was just worried that I was doing the wrong thing. It was like when I'd been in church watching others go for communion. I was even worried that part of me was pinning my hopes on a clear and powerful religious experience when confirmed to prove to me once and for all God is there. I can confirm I had no such miraculous vision, and yet when it was my turn and I stood with the bishop, I felt at peace. I wasn't an imposter anymore. With the bishop's hands on my head, I felt like I had when I sat in that little chapel in Lincoln Cathedral, like I was in the right place and doing something that went beyond the reassurance of certainty. I can't give words to this feeling, but it was weird. It was wonderful weird. So I want to thank Rob and Lizzie for welcoming me and the others to opportunities to talk. Obviously, thank you to the people of this congregation who are so welcoming and reassuring, and for those offering words of prayers and encouragement as well. you got me to the right place. So what next? I do genuinely feel different after my confirmation. I feel calmer, a bit more confident in talking about my faith, as you can see, and even a little bit more at home in this very building. I am worried about labels. It's easy to make assumptions about anyone of faith and their views, but I hope that my friends and my family are just happy to talk to me about my faith, and I would encourage them to do so. More than that, I feel like I do have communion with God. I feel reassured now to feel thankful and angry and confused and every other emotion about God in a way I didn't before. I'm pretty sure God can take it. And I think it comes from the communion I now feel I have with God. And by that, I don't just mean the bread and the wine. I mean the ongoing relationship with God and the awareness of his presence. I don't think it'll dramatically change me in everyday life, but I hope it changes me for the better in the long term, whether it be giving, well-being, or helping others. I'm looking forward to getting a bit more involved in the church community, not just in the church building, but outside as well. I'm not sure exactly what that'll look like yet, but it's a nice thought that I'll do more for others in ways I may not have done if it wasn't for my faith. And I'm looking forward to learning more and exploring more about my faith with others as well. But most of all, I'm looking forward to the possibility that one day I might say something to someone which sets them on a path to exploring their own faith like I did. I like the idea that I might say some words in the future to encourage someone to develop their own relationship with God and start their own journey to baptism or confirmation. One day there may be someone who thinks back during their baptism or their confirmation to when I once said to them something along the lines of, you know, you can have communion if you want to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was really beautiful. It's strange thinking about communion, you know, taking the bread and the wine. I could certainly relate to Mark's comments about that, you know, good, weird. I was part of a large Irish Roman Catholic family. But because my parents separated when I was very young, I wasn't raised in the church. It was a complete mystery to me, other than when I used to go to weddings. And I had all these cousins. It was a massive family, and they'd all troop up. They'd been through confirmation. They'd troop up to the altar and take the sacraments. And it was one of those things I looked on, and it felt special, and I was drawn to it. But it was only once I'd been confirmed myself, which was 5 years ago. Now, I came to faith after watching Evie being born, and that's what made it real and tangible for me. And in many ways, little agent of chaos that she is, it's a perfect embodiment of what faith is for me. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's a lot of questions, you know, and it's stories. That's what it's really about. Today we've heard Mark's stories, and we've all got our own stories, and it's all becoming part of this bigger story. You know, in our gospel reading today, Jesus is having a debate around what the Sabbath law means, and he doesn't involve himself in that discussion on a kind of deep theological level. What he does, he tells stories. He says to those around him, do you know the story of David, what he did with the holy bread in the temple? And that's what he's saying. He's drawing everyone in to that bigger story, the Old Testament story that they all knew so well. He was saying, what's your part in these stories? What I think it might be quite interesting to do, we've all got our own stories. And so maybe just for a few minutes you can turn and talk to the person next to you about why you might consider yourself a Christian. You might not consider yourself a Christian. You might be a seeker, someone of another faith, but you might want to talk to them about what your faith means to you, who's been important in your faith journey. Yeah, that's you, Evie. You know, what do you love about church? What do you love about your faith? And more importantly, these stories don't end. They're an ongoing story. New questions, not always necessary straight answers. You know, what are you looking forward to in your faith? What are you working on? What do you think the future holds? So maybe just for a few minutes, let's all talk to each other and reflect on those things.